Hey guys, what's going on? Josh here from Polymathics, the YouTube channel that helps you become a modern day Renaissance man. And today, in this video, we're going to talk about the hero's journey, also known as the Monomyth. In particular, we're going to discuss one of the final stages called Master of Both Worlds. In old myth, this was called Master of Both Worlds because the hero is taking the lessons that he learned in the special world, in the unknown world, and he's bringing them back to the new world, using them in conjunction with the new world's physics and mechanics and people in order to restore the boon to society, to return the power. This can take form in many different ways, but when you guys are writing or analyzing stories, whatever it is that you do, think about this, because this next point I'm going to bring up is also very important during this stage, and that is the sacrifice, martyrdom, rebirth. Now I'm going to discuss all these things, but they play a key role, and what I mean is this: in the special world, 9 times out of 10, the hero is going to learn to trust their intuition in some way that society has told them not to. The system has told them not to. Perhaps your hero is someone who works for a company and their motto is always follow the rules, something to that effect. And then when the hero goes into the special world, the mentor and several of the trials that he faces teaches him that the rules aren't always right, or there's a better way, or there's a smarter way or something, and that you have to trust your gut. And then when the hero comes back to the known world, the ordinary world, he must take that new motto with him in order to defeat the antagonist. Normally it's the shadow. And one other thing to consider about this is, and this is where the sacrifice plays in. A lot of times, whatever this lesson or this action is that the hero has to take, he has to sacrifice himself in many different ways, but on an emotional, mental, psychological level, on a deeper inner level. That's where the hero is making the real sacrifice. The hero has learned through the journey that the physical body and sacrificing his life is necessary for the journey, and he's doesn't have much hope of survival. Normally this final push through pursuit and then crossing the return threshold, the hero has come to realization that he's probably not going to make it out, and this is a suicide mission. But that withstanding, the hero has still decided to sacrifice his body. But what he doesn't realize is he also will have to make a deeper sacrifice. And all of these things are tied in. There's also a tie-in with theme. If you look at a video I did a few months ago, I believe it's called The Final Battle, I discussed that in great detail about how the boon, the antagonist or the shadow, and the hero all play tug of war with the theme in order to create this magical moment at the end where the hero does sacrifice. If you guys want to check that out, I'll leave a link somewhere and you can do that. But for right now, I want to focus on just mastery of two worlds. Now again, it's going to require a bit of a sacrifice. And in some stories, the sacrifice comes in different ways. Sometimes the hero is the one that sacrifices their body physically. Other times, like I said, the more important sacrifice is the inner sacrifice. The sacrifice of their inner flaw. But other times, another character will make a sacrifice. And we'll explore that in some of the examples that I give in a few minutes here. And then tied to that, the hero is doing something that the villain could never do. Whatever it is that the hero does is beyond the villain's wildest dreams. Psychologically, they couldn't grasp it because it's not within their character to do. And a lot of times, the act of sacrifice is that thing that the villain is incapable to do. Many villains, or shadows, or antagonists, the key trait that they have, like many of them, especially good ones, is that they do have, like they want a similar or the same thing as the hero, or they are fighting for a somewhat just goal. Those are the really good villains throughout time. But the problem is they would rather sacrifice others than themselves. And so a lot of times that is a distinguishing factor between a hero and a villain. And the main difference between their psychological makeup that makes that dividing line, and why it seems so gray in a lot of areas. And then once the hero does this action that makes the sacrifice, and he's mastered both worlds, he is in a place of extreme vulnerability, because whatever flaw he's had, he's finally allowing himself to be, or herself, to be vulnerable. And when this happens, many times the hero can die. Many times a hero does die. Many times a hero is on the brink of death when this happens. Many times the villain takes advantage of this moment. But then what happens is rebirth. The hero, because of his newfound vulnerability, the boon many times accepts that as a sacrifice. And from that sacrifice, the boon opens up its power to the hero in full force. And the power of the boon is the power of the gods. It's true divinity in the sense that now the hero has access to this all-knowing, all-powerful force that he can now use to defeat the villain. And through that rebirth, he is no longer the child or the young man or orphan that he was, or the young woman that she was when she started out, but rather they are a mature adult. They have maturized. So I'm talking all this theory. Let's get into some examples, and then I think you guys will really understand what's going on here. And there's so many. I hope I don't forget them because they're all really good. The one, my go-to one that I always bring up in probably half of these videos, is when Luke Skywalker is in the Death Star trench run in A New Hope, and he's in the trench run. Biggs just got killed. Wedge just had to bail out, or else he was gonna die. So Luke's completely on his own, and he has to shoot his torpedo or whatever it is into this very small little pipe hole, exhaust pipe. And Darth Vader is on his tail with 2 other TIE fighters. And Darth Vader's about to lock in. And then what happens is Han Solo comes to the rescue, and he knocks Luke, or no, he doesn't knock Luke. He knocks Vader out of orbit. Now, he doesn't destroy Vader or anything like that. And some people might say, well, wait a minute, does that mean that Han is the hero because he defeated Vader? No. Well, does that mean that that Luke's shot isn't as powerful because Han is the one who took out Vader? No. And I'll tell you why. First, Han is a hero in and of himself. He's the anti-hero. And he represents a reflection of Luke. Secondly, the boon, the returning of the power of the boon, wasn't to defeat Darth Vader. Darth Vader, for as cool and badass as he is, he's just one hand of a much larger system called the Empire. The real threat and the real power that had to be returned to society was a balance. That there were no, which essentially meant the destruction of the Death Star, which is why Luke is that hero. Now, what Luke does is twofold. The thing he does that Vader would never do is essentially sacrifice himself for the cause. Because Luke, up until Han came up there, Luke was basically, he was going to die. And pretty much everybody knew it. Everybody feels it. Until Han comes, nobody expects Luke to make it. Luke, the sacrifice he makes is that his whole life, living with Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru and in this world that's controlled by the Empire, he's been taught to suppress his own intuition and trust other people, to listen to other people, to rely on other things, to rely on computers, to rely on the system to do things for him. And so when he's lining up his shot, he's got the targeting system up to his eye. And at the last minute, he hears Obi-Wan, through the Force, tell him to let go and use the Force. And that's what Luke does. And because of that, he allows himself to be vulnerable, because now he's not relying on anything else but himself, which is something Luke has had a struggle to do. And this is a great maturation plot, because Luke is this young farm boy who hasn't been tested by the world. So he's not confident. He's not secure in who he is. He doesn't have self-esteem very much. So this is a difficult thing for him to do, but he does it anyways. And as we all know, he then taps into the power of the Force. He makes a shot that's pretty much impossible, destroys the Death Star, saves the day. Another really great moment, and I mentioned this one in my video about the final battle, is where Star-Lord in Guardians of the Galaxy, he does a dance-off with the villain, oh gosh, Ronan. And Ronan, this is so far beyond what Ronan would do. He's just taken off guard. He's completely confused. He's kind of upset because this was his moment of glory where he was going to destroy the Nova Corps and all this stuff. And now Star-Lord is just acting a fool in front of him. So he gets his attention, gives Rocket enough time to shoot Ronan's battle axe, which knocks the gem free. And then here's the sacrifice. Star-Lord has already seen earlier in the collector's office that only supreme beings can touch these stones. And that the minute a mere mortal touches the stone, an infinity gem, they'll pretty much be obliterated. They'll die. But he grabs it anyways in an attempt to keep it from Ronan. And through that sacrifice, he is momentarily vulnerable, and it looks like he's going to die. And if it had only been him, he would have died. Because when he grabbed it, it started tearing him apart. Now, when we talk about inner sacrifice, the interesting thing is, while he made himself vulnerable physically there, the inner sacrifice is what happens next. Gamora and the other teammates put their hands out in order for him to accept help, in order for him to accept love. And if we remember, at the very beginning of the story, Star-Lord, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. Star-Lord, when he was a child, he witnessed his mother die. And the last thing she wanted was for him to hold his hand. But as a boy, he didn't want to hold her hand because he knew that that was accepting that she was dying. That was letting go. And in this really great moment of storytelling, the director, the writer, they show Star-Lord seeing his mother through eternity, essentially. And he gets another chance to hold her hand so that he can accept that love, so that he can say goodbye. I mean, there's so many. This is what is called a moment of catharsis. And catharsis is very difficult to explain, and a lot of books on the hero's journey actually discuss it, but it's a release of pressure, essentially. It's a release, it's an inner release when something that's been troubling you for a long time is released because of a moment like this. So when he holds his mother's hand, he's actually grabbing onto, I believe it's Gamora's hand, but it does two things. One, he reaches a moment of catharsis, which is great and incredible. It's an epiphany for him. He grows as a person, he matures. But additionally, by grabbing Gamora's hand and then eventually the rest of the team, through each of them, they have the power to keep the Infinity Gem at bay. And that's what they end up using to destroy. Now they have the power of this almighty force that they are able to use against Ronan to destroy him. Let's see. In Dragon Slayer. Oh my gosh, this is another movie that I just watched last night, and I hadn't seen it for maybe 2 decades. But in Dragon Slayer, you have the boy realized how to bring back his mentor, the wizard, or the sorcerer, whatever you want to call him. And he tells the boy to take the magical necklace and at the right moment destroy it. And he says, you'll know what the right moment is. And then what happens is the mentor goes up top this mountain and he basically does battle with the dragon for a little bit. The dragon attacks him. He uses magic. He uses lightning to fight the dragon. But see, the key here, and they've kind of built this up throughout the story, is that dragons only exist because of magical beings like wizards and sorcerers. And that when the only way that the dragons will be gone is the day that wizards and sorcerers are gone. So the wizard knows this, and he's essentially planning to sacrifice himself to destroy the dragon. And while this duel is going on, the hero's, I guess for a lack of a better word, girlfriend, plus she's also kind of the his sidekick, she keeps telling him, destroy the rock, now's the time. She gets a boulder, she's like, destroy the rock. And the hero's like, no, it's not time. He said I would know when it's the right time, it's not the right time. So, you would think, okay, if the wizard is the one fighting the dragon, and all the boy has to do is destroy this necklace, then how is the boy the hero? Well, it's because, again, like I said, with Darth Vader, the dragon is representative of a darker force, basically a dark magical force in this story. And while you may be able to eliminate a dragon, they will continue to reappear. Magical creatures will continue to reappear. What you really have to do is to restore balance to society is to remove this dark magic. This and the magic, while the wizard may be a good wizard, the point was that like the metaphorical meaning of magic was that there was this unfair advantage that certain people and creatures had over others. And that motif is kind of played out throughout the story. But what happens is the wizard, essentially he does this duel, the dragon and the wizard are both kind of beat up. But at one point the wizard, he entices the dragon to come after him, and then he just puts his hands out like this, and then the dragon scoops him up. And at that point, the boy knows that's the right time, because now the dragon and the wizard are there together. So then he crushes the rock, which destroys the wizard, which also in turn destroys the dragon, but moreover, it destroys that dark magical influence that's in the world. And the reason why this is such a heroic deed is because it will now prevent other magical creatures like dragons from attacking society. Now, for the hero, the sacrifice was much more difficult because throughout most of the film, we believe that the mentor is already dead, the wizard. And then late in the game, we find out he actually had a plan all the time so that the hero would bring him back with magic at the appropriate time. So the hero, he cares for his mentor because the mentor is like a foster parent to him, a foster father. This person has not only kept him alive and nourished him, but this is the person who taught him about magic, who taught him about being a hero in the first place and kind of led him along. So for the hero, people might glance this over and say, oh, he broke a rock. No, he had to say goodbye. He had to let go of someone who he truly cared about in order to restore balance to society. And that's a motif that we see a lot in hero journey stories, where the hero has to let go of someone or something that means a great deal to them, that helped them throughout their young years, their childhood, in order for them to get beyond that childlike state and into a more mature state. So that's Dragon Slayer. I'm trying to think if there's any more examples. I mean, these are some of the best moments in movie history. So that's why it's like so good. In Passengers, you have the boy. I forget their names, which sucks because Passengers is like one of my favorite movies. But the guy who Chris Pratt plays, he he makes a physical sacrifice right away, which is, you know, he basically goes out into the ship with his spacesuit and like a door shield in order to buy enough time to clear up the reactor. And the girl that Jennifer Lawrence plays, you know, she has to, the first sacrifice she has to make is that of putting him in danger when she's now realized that despite what he's done by waking her up early, she still loves him. He's the love of her life. And she has to, the first sacrifice she has to make is basically putting him in danger by releasing the heat pressure from the engine room, whatever it is, the reactor. And then what happens is once they've done that, Chris Pratt's character, his tether cord is broken, so he's flying aimlessly in space. And two bad things are about to happen. Either one, he's going to go out into space so far where he can't be reached, and then he'll die a terrible death of probably freezing to death. Or two, he's going to go through the exhaust area of the ship where he'll basically be burned alive. Neither are good options. And Jennifer Lawrence's character doesn't want that because, again, this is the person she loves, and she realizes that this is her true love. So she suits up, and this is for an inward sacrifice. This is one of the places where it gets really deep because she's now rescuing someone who essentially made a decision that she would die with him. And that's something she's been struggling with throughout the whole entire film. Once she found out that Chris Pratt's character is the one that woke her up and put her life basically at risk, he basically sacrificed her life so that he could have someone to be with on the ship. She has been extremely upset because, you know, he basically killed her in a sense. And so for her to go out and risk her life to then save his is a very huge inner sacrifice for her. But she's also realized that despite of what he did, her destiny, her fate has always been wrapped with him, and that she wouldn't want it to be with anybody else. So she goes out there, she saves him, brings him back to the medical bay, saves his life. There's the rebirth, by the way. Many times this happens. The hero dies. One of the heroes dies at the end and is brought back to life. In Indiana Jones, of The Last Crusade, Sean Connery's character, Indiana Jones's father, is brought back to life by the, he's revived by the chalice. But if we go back to Passengers, there is a third moment of sacrifice. And this is the most powerful, because then they're tested one last time. Chris Pratt basically finds out, like, hey, we can use the medical bay chamber as another sleeping tube, and you can go back into cryostasis so that you can still make it to the new planet and write your story and all this other stuff. All of the dreams that she had before. So what this is doing is, this is actually, although, you know, they had to face the ship and all that stuff, which would be considered the kind of the final battle, this is really the final test, the major test, which is, will Jennifer Lawrence's character revert back to her old ways, her old flaw, which is, it's a weakness in thinking. And that weakness is to want your fate, your destiny, your life to go in one direction according to this very precise plan, and If anything happens outside of that, then it doesn't work. And the decision that she makes, again, it's a sacrifice that represents her full-fledged dynamicism, or whatever the word would be. She's a dynamic character, right? She doesn't just stay static. She changes because she decides that she is going to live the rest of her life with Chris Pratt on this boat, just the two of them. And when she makes that decision, it represents the maturation that's happened inside of her. She's no longer the person she was when she entered the ship, who wanted to go to this new planet and write this story and etc., etc. What she realizes is the story that means the most, the story that's most important, the story of her life is waiting for her on the ship now with him in that moment. So it's a really great story. And I could go on and on and on. Lots of Lord of the Rings examples, Princess Bride, all kinds of stuff. Never Ending Story. I mean, there's just a ton of different examples, but we're at 30 minutes here, and I don't know how much longer I can keep you guys if I haven't lost you already. So, when you're looking at a story or you're writing your own story, just consider these things for the final battle. Consider the fact that the hero needs to face the shadow in the final battle, and that they're going to make a sacrifice. It's going to be something that they do that the shadow could never conceive or imagine, because it's just not in the shadow's psychological makeup. And that this will put the heroes at such vulnerability that they might even die. But through that death represents the old self, the old person. They'll be reborn as a new person with access to new power from the boon, which will allow them to not only defeat the shadow, but become a better version of their self, a more mature version. And I have to tell you guys one more. I'm sorry. There's one more that I just thought of that's like so good. Thorin Oakenshield, when he fights Azog, the White Orc, in the very last battle of the five armies. Anybody who's seen the movie or read the book, you know he dies. Okay, Thorin dies, and you know, for a long time I had thought that Bilbo is a hero, but Thorin Oakenshield is truly the hero of that series. And there's a lot of reasons why. They're very nitpicky things that I've analyzed over the years. But if you look at it, Thorin is the one who faces the shadow in the end. Not Bilbo, not anybody else, it's Thorin. And the shadow is definitely Azog. Thorin is the one who has to make the sacrifice that Azog would never make, which is basically at the end, when Azog has him, Thorin sacrifices himself. He dies so that he can destroy Azog. And Azog represents, again, this great evil that's in the world. And the evil that took out his family line. Not just his grandfather, crazy grandfather, or his father, but his two cousins, Fili and Kili. So, and because of this, Thorin dies physically. He was only king for a momentary time, which was his dream, but because he let go of that dream, and he died not only to himself outwardly, but inwardly as well, Thorin lives on in Middle-earth and through his people, and not just his people, like all the people, the elves, the humans, as this revered hero of legend. And and for Bilbo, you know, Bilbo recognizes that they were friends. But Thorin was a very flawed character, and many good heroes are. They're flawed characters that are contradictory, they're hypocritical sometimes, and Thorin definitely was that. But what makes him such a great redeeming character, just like Darth Vader, is that he, in the end, decided to sacrifice himself for the greater good in order to restore society to a balance. So, again, I could go on and on. I mentioned Darth Vader and now I want to talk about him. But we are going to stop here. I hope that you guys have a really good understanding of what Master of the Two Worlds means. Master of the Two Worlds. And in the next video, it'll be, I think, the last video in this series, we're going to discuss the freedom to live stage. So I hope everybody's doing well and you're writing well, and if you guys have any questions, please feel free to post them down below and I'll address them. But until next time, take it easy.